My fiancé, who had been in a relationship with me for 10 years, fell in love with my deceased illegitimate younger sister. To take revenge on me, he deliberately brought a substitute for my sister to our wedding. He said, "Isabella, if you want to be Mrs. Levi, you'll just have to endure it, or else the wedding will be cancelled." I cancelled the wedding right in front of him. However, later, he went crazy at my wedding. He asked me with red eyes, "Why? How could you marry someone else?" I just smiled and said, "You're not worthy of being Isabella's husband." When Levi showed up at our wedding with a girl who looked a lot like Olivia, I felt as if I had been slapped hard across the face. Suddenly, I realized that when he bowed his head to make peace and wanted to continue fulfilling the marriage contract with me, it was just to see my embarrassment and humiliation at this moment. But this was really not the time to fall out. At present, the new project of the Isabella Group was at a crucial stage. Those present were not only the relatives and friends of the Levi family and the Isabella family, but also my business partners and investors. I could only take a deep breath and step forward under the curious gazes around me. Before he could do anything more outrageous, I suppressed all my emotions and forced a proper smile, then said to my assistant beside me, "Since they're here, they're guests. Xiao Tang, arrange a seat for this lady." Meanwhile, I warned Levi with my eyes to stop while he was ahead. But he just sneered. He directly took the hand of the girl beside him and said in a voice that everyone present could hear, "Isabella, I brought her here today to tell you that Grace is my woman. If you still want to be Mrs. Levi, you'll just have to endure it, or else the wedding will be cancelled." In the exchange of glances, I understood that he was blackmailing me. The Isabella Group that I had snatched back from my father was a mess. Although it had improved a lot under my management in recent years, its foundation was still unstable after all. The current new project could be said to be related to the future of the company. This marriage alliance was far more important to me and the Isabella Group than it was to him. He bet that I wouldn't easily fall out with him at this time. I looked at him and for the first time felt that having a tacit understanding where we could understand each other's thoughts just with a look in our eyes wasn't a good thing. I clenched my fist gently, and my thumb brushed over the ring that he gave me when he confessed his love to me on my middle finger. Finally, I asked him one more time, "Levi, are you really sure about this?" But he said, "Isabella, this is what we owe Olivia." "What did you say?" My voice trembled a little due to the uncontrollable emotions. There was serious infighting within the Levi family. Levi's parents were killed by his uncle when he was very young. It was my mother who, out of her years of friendship with his mother, took him to the Isabella family to take care of him so that he could live safely until now. He witnessed with his own eyes how Olivia's biological mother and my father framed my mother, drove her mad, locked her in a sanatorium, and finally forced her to death. He also witnessed how I survived with humiliation in this family whose surname had been changed by my father. After my mother died, he had to return to the Levi family and lived in fear under his second uncle. At that time, it was he who held my hand and said to me, "Isabella, don't worry. I won't let any of those who bullied us go." But now, he said that this was what we owed Olivia. An indescribable anger suddenly surged in my heart. I suppressed the surging emotions, raised my hand and tore off the half-covering veil on my head, and said in an extremely cold voice, "Levi, don't drag me into your madness." My father used the money of the Isabella family to support their mother and daughter outside. Every penny that Olivia spent since she was born was my asset. Everything she had was stolen from the Isabella family and was stained with the blood of me and my mother. What do I owe her? Isabella. Levi interrupted me sharply, unable to maintain his usual calm demeanor anymore. Olivia is already dead. Don't you really feel any guilt at all? Do you even have a heart? I never wanted her to die, I retorted expressionlessly. If you hadn't been unwilling to let Chloe's mother go, how could she have committed suicide? Levi asked me with bloodshot eyes. I was stunned. So that's how it was. It turned out that he had always blamed Olivia's death on me. Olivia had always liked Levi, even though she had never received a response from him. Back then, Levi's uncle was driven into a corner by Levi and wanted to drive a car and perish together with Levi. At the critical moment, it was Olivia who rushed over and pushed Levi away, but she herself was seriously injured and had to have her limb amputated to save her life. And before the operation, she was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. At that time, my father had already been sent to prison by me, and Olivia's biological mother, Chloe, had also been sent by me to the sanatorium where they had locked up my mother. Olivia begged Levi to bring her to see me. She hoped that I could, for the sake of her being on the verge of death, let her mother go. I refused. The next day, Olivia committed suicide. She left a last word saying that she hoped to use her life to atone for her mother's sins. I stared at Levi's face silently. I could no longer see the boy who had walked hand in hand with me in the past. I just found that the way he looked at me at this moment was exactly the same as when he held Olivia's body and looked at me. Only then did I realize that he had already hated me back then. At this moment, I suddenly calmed down. It was as if there was suddenly an empty black hole in my heart swallowing up all my emotions. That feeling was just like going back to the day when I watched my mother, who had been tortured into a madwoman, jump off the rooftop in front of me, but I was powerless to do anything. I knew that the boy who had grown up with me and walked through the darkest time of life with me was finally dead today. I heard myself asking him in an extremely calm voice, why should I let go of the murderer who killed my mother? And why should I feel guilty for the suicide of the daughter of my enemy? Back then, Chloe and my father killed my mother and abused me. If it hadn't been for the fact that my grandfather had already made a will stating that all his property could only be inherited by me when I turned 20 and that if something happened to me the property would be donated, I might not even have survived to adulthood. Even though I did survive to adulthood. In those years, because Olivia liked Levi, I was bullied both at home and at school. Once, Levi had also looked at the wounds on my body with red eyes countless times, gritted his teeth and swore that he would take revenge. But now he said, Isabella, you're simply unreasonable. How could you become so vicious? Vicious? I had a calm expression on my face. I took off the ring that I had worn for 10 years and threw it in front of him. All right then, Levi, we're done. Levi was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he hadn't expected that I would really break up with him. But then he threatened me again, Isabella, think it through. If you leave today, the cooperation between the Levi family and the Isabella family will be over. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Only then did his expression relax a little. As long as you accept the matter of grace, I can guarantee that the cooperation between the two families won't be affected. Levi, I interrupted him, perhaps you've never really understood me. Back then, when I watched my mother make concessions everywhere for the sake of her feelings, only to be hurt even more severely by my father in the end, I knew that making concessions without principles couldn't win over others' conscience, but would only make oneself lose ground step by step. And I would never let myself fall into such a situation. After leaving the hotel, I went straight back to the company. At this crucial stage, I didn't even have time to deal with my own emotions. I immediately asked my secretary to notify the public relations department and all the senior executives to hold an emergency meeting. My departure meant the breakdown of the marriage alliance between their two families. Now that things had come to this point, I had to come up with countermeasures immediately to deal with the possible public opinion storm that might follow. And the impact of this incident on the confidence of the investors. I was sitting in the spacious office chair with my eyes closed, still wearing the pure white wedding dress that I hadn't had time to change out of. But my mind was extremely clear to Levi, the young master of the wealthy circle in Beijing, always attracted attention. With such a commotion at the wedding today, this news couldn't be suppressed. I could even foresee exactly what the hot search would be like tomorrow. Now that things had reached this stage, instead of passively responding after public opinion had fermented, it would be better to take advantage of this wave of public opinion to give our Isabella group a boost. I held a meeting with the company's senior executives all night long in my wedding dress and finalized the public opinion strategy for the next day. Then, in the early hours of the morning, I called in a professional styling team and asked them to design and create the look for me to face the public the next day according to my requirements. The next day, the news that Levi and I had a change in our relationship and the wedding was cancelled unexpectedly became a hot search topic as expected. Although the Levi group had been trying to reduce the popularity of the topic all along, and even released the gossip of two of its artists to divert attention. But with the real money I spent, plus Levi's popularity on the internet in recent years and the public's curiosity about wealthy marriages, this topic exploded without a doubt. When the public was speculating about the reasons for the breakdown of the marriage, the marketing accounts arranged by me started to release various intimate photos of Levi and his substitute Grace meeting secretly over the past year. At the same time, it was reported that I seemed to have gone abroad overnight because of a broken heart. The bits and pieces of how Levi and I had supported each other in the past were also dug up. Just when netizens were lamenting that a relationship of mutual salvation in the end couldn't withstand the test of time, the Levi group finally issued a clarification, saying that Levi and I had parted on good terms. But the netizens didn't buy it. What kind of relationship is it that you only part on good terms on the wedding day? I was sitting in the VIP lounge at the airport, drinking coffee, and giving a thumbs up to the netizens who were mocking the clarification statement of the Levi group. By the way, I asked someone to release the video of Levi and me arguing at the wedding scene. With this, public opinion exploded directly. Especially after the past events of my mother being persecuted by my father and Olivia's biological mother were dug up, the netizens were directly enraged. Damn it. It makes my blood boil. What kind of outrageous remarks are these? If my mother was killed and everything that originally belonged to me was occupied by an illegitimate daughter, I would go crazy and take revenge on the whole family. Some people also dug up the comparison photos of Olivia showing tens of millions of jewelry on her social media account in the past, while I could only wear the whitened school uniform all year round during the same period. How dare they morally kidnap Isabella to forgive her mother like this? Of course, there were also some kind-hearted netizens who just said, "Respect the dead." I'm not good at scolding people, so I'll leave now. At this time, I posted a statement on my personal account. The content was just 6 words: broken up, focus on work. The official Weibo account of the Isabella group simultaneously reposted it and attached my airport photos. At the same time, it was emphasized that my going abroad this time was not because of a broken heart, but to meet with the designer of our company's new women's clothing brand. My airport photos, under the arrangement of the public relations department, quickly spread all over the internet. These seemingly casual snapshots were actually carefully designed by a professional team down to every strand of hair. In the photos, I was wearing a white t-shirt with a tailored and slim-fit design and wide-leg suit pants, and my slightly curly long hair was casually tied up at the back of my head. This outfit didn't have any exaggerated styling, but with the help of the styling team, it looked very capable and relaxed. There was no sign of depression after a broken relationship at all. Damn, sister is so cool. Oh my god, who can understand? These suit pants on the sister are exactly what I like. I really love the career-oriented type. When my plane landed abroad, my fashion brand had already become a hot search topic. All the single items of the same style in my photos were sold out, especially the fashion line of the brand. This brand series was originally marketed with high-quality fabrics and comfortable tailoring as its selling points. The target customers were women who had a certain economic ability and had certain requirements for the material and tailoring comfort of clothing. These women were quite experienced, and compared to romantic stories, they cared more about their own feelings. And the trend of this public opinion happened to coincide with the concept of this brand. My series of operations directly made my fashion brand become popular. This is my coping strategy. It's also my principle in life. Instead of being beaten passively, it's better to take the initiative. But what I need to solve is not just the public opinion crisis brought about by the failure of the marriage alliance. What's more important is to resolve the confidence crisis of investors in the projects of the Isabella Group caused by this incident. Although the fashionable women's clothing is just a sideline of the Isabella Group, however, The popularity to this extent and the huge sales profits brought about by it have still increased the investors' confidence in the Isabella Group to a certain degree. It can also bring a considerable cash flow to the Isabella Group. More importantly, this incident has also made the outside world, which was still on the sidelines, understand that even without Levi, Isabella, can still stand firm. This public relations event that was supposed to be a crisis has turned into a successful marketing campaign. However, the moment I let go of the pressure, I fell seriously ill belatedly. All the experiences with Levi in the past finally turned into belated knives, stabbing at my vital parts one by one. I thought you really didn't care. Look at you. Is it worth it to be like this for Levi? When I woke up in the manor in Tuscany, my sworn enemy Ava was sitting by my bedside, looking at me with a teasing expression. I took the peeled apple from her hand and said casually, "After all, we were together for 10 years, not 10 days. Besides, didn't you like Levi before?" When this was mentioned, Ava seemed as if some dark history of hers had been exposed. She waved her hands frantically. "Don't mention it. When I think about the days when I fought against you every day for a lousy man back then, I wish I could go back in time and strangle myself. But to be honest," she narrowed her eyes and looked at me, "I originally thought that after Levi fell out with you because of Olivia, you wouldn't forgive him again. Once unfaithful, never be trusted again. After Olivia committed suicide, Levi used all his connections to rescue Chloe from the sanatorium. But I counterattacked and deliberately let the enemies of my father and me take advantage of the security loopholes when transferring her and abducted her. By the time Levi rescued Chloe from the Chi family, she had already been really driven mad by the torture. Because of this incident, Levi and I had the biggest quarrel since we knew each other. Judging from my personality, I really shouldn't have given Levi any more chances. But it's Levi," I said softly. "We grew up together, relied on each other, and walked through hardships. We had seen each other's truest and most embarrassing sides. We used to be relatives who trusted each other, allies who sought warmth from each other, and later lovers who understood each other's hearts. When I was injured and in a coma, he once kowtowed step by step to the Buddhist temple just to beg for a peace talisman for me. He pressed his injured forehead against my hand and begged me over and over again, 'Isabella, don't leave me alone.' I always thought that we were an inseparable whole. So when he came to make peace, I gave him another chance. But this was also the last chance I could give him. This illness came like a flu after letting go. It came with great momentum, but when it passed, it was just so. When I returned to China, the heat about Levi and me had already dissipated. Although the new project of the company had the capital injection from the sales of the fashion line. Under the suppression of the Levi Group, there were still some investors who didn't want to offend the Levi Group and withdrew their capital, and the company encountered considerable financial pressure. I was looking at the new document just delivered by the private detective and was considering what to do next. Ava came to me on her own initiative. "Have you considered forming a marriage alliance with our Ava family?" She asked straight to the point. I was stunned and asked, "With you?" Cough, cough. The hand with which she was holding the teacup froze. She pushed the young man sitting beside her with her elbow and said, "Speak up. Weren't you quite capable at home?" The young man beside her blushed instantly. He raised his head, put down the teacup very solemnly, sat up straight, and said to me face to face, "Senior sister, I'm James. I hope senior sister can form a marriage alliance with me." As he spoke, his cold and pale face had already turned as red as a boiled shrimp shell. Ava looked at him and showed a disgusted expression, but still asked me, "How about it? If our two families form a marriage alliance, our Ava family will invest the capital that you lack. Just consider it as the dowry that I, as an elder sister, give to my younger brother." Dowry? I took a look at James, found an excuse to ask my assistant to take him out first, and then asked Ava, "Are you serious?" Only then did Ava put on a serious face and said, "When my father almost married me off to an old man in order to help his illegitimate son get into a high position, it was you who helped me regardless of past grudges. I already owed you a favor." Then who is your brother? He likes you, Ava shrugged. Since the time when you took him with you to save me back then, he has liked you. Over the years, he has not only been spying on your updates all the time but also deliberately applied to the university that you attended. Although I also think his behavior is quite strange, but after all, he's my own brother. As an elder sister, I should help if I can. Only then did I remember how James looked when I first met him. He was wearing a school uniform. I remember he was just a middle school student at that time. Calculating his age, is he still studying now? I asked. He graduated with a master's degree this year, Ava said. Don't worry. He has reached the legal age of marriage. In the afternoon, I walked out of the office building after work and was waiting for my driver. I saw James, who was wearing a black hoodie, squatting beside the flower bed. With a height of nearly 1.9 meters and that face of his, he was still very eye-catching even though he was crouching there. After seeing me, James' eyes suddenly lit up. The whole temperament of him seemed to change from a wolf who was indifferent to the surroundings to a big wolf dog waiting for its owner. Sister, you're off work. He ran up to me and looked at me with his long eyelashes drooping. At this moment, even though I knew clearly what was on his mind, I still couldn't help asking, why are you here? My sister said that if I couldn't handle the marriage alliance, I shouldn't go home. He lowered his head. His slightly curly black hair was gently swayed by the wind, looking rather pitiful. Suddenly, I had the idea of teasing him a little. Why are you being so coquettish, little boy? I laughed and reached out to touch the broken hair on his forehead. But I'm not into this kind of thing. James raised his head, looking a bit annoyed. It wasn't until I saw that he seemed to regret so much that he wanted to strangle himself from the previous moment that I took the initiative to hold his hand. Let's go. He looked at me in surprise. I smiled and said, I'll take you to my house to have a look at the environment first. The investment contract from the Ava Group and the prenuptial agreement were placed in front of me and James together. The part of the investment from the Ava family would be transferred to James' name in the form of shares. After the lawyer explained the relevant parts about premarital property, he began to explain the parts regarding married life and children. The content was relatively simple. Married life would follow the principle of voluntariness of both parties. If the two parties couldn't develop feelings during the marriage, either party could file for divorce. During the marriage, if the two parties had children and there was only one child, then the child must take the mother's surname. And when getting divorced, the man must unconditionally give up the custody rights. Correspondingly, the woman couldn't ask the man to bear the responsibility of raising the child for any reason. This was my bottom line. After all, my family really had a business to inherit. However, I also knew that such conditions were not easy to accept. Looking at James, who seemed a bit confused after hearing the terms, I said straightforwardly, the Isabella Group needs an heir. If you can't accept it, I can also have children through medical means. No, I'm not unwilling, James said hurriedly. I was just. He took a look at the lawyer beside him, blushed, and whispered, I was just thinking about what names we should give our children. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth couldn't help rising. No wonder Ava said her brother was a hopeless romantic. However, he was really quite cute. After signing all the contracts and agreements, that night Ava revealed the news of the marriage alliance and cooperation between the two families during an interview. The good news was that the stocks of both the Isabella Group and the Ava Group went up. The bad news was that since James seldom appeared in public, while I had quite a lot of interactions with Ava over the years, even the incident that I rescued Ava on the street had been on the local news before. Once the news of the marriage alliance came out, instead, there was an inexplicable trend of shipping me and Ava as a couple online. I had always been rather indifferent to these things. Until my assistant reminded me that a video of me and James as a couple had suddenly become a trending topic. After graduating from undergraduate school, James set up a game studio by himself and released 2 indie games, both of which had good quality and word of mouth. So when I saw the logo of the little white studio on the avatar of the new blogger who uploaded the video, I knew what James had been doing mysteriously with his computer in his arms these 2 nights. I didn't expect that he cared so much. I thought for a while and then logged into my personal account and gave him a like. In the next second, I received a message reminder showing that the opposite account had followed me. I lowered my head and smiled. My assistant was a bit puzzled. I also pretended that nothing had happened and got up to go to the meeting room for a meeting. The meeting lasted until the afternoon. When I finished my work, it was already 10 o'clock at night. As soon as I got home, I saw Levi and James sitting on the sofa, glaring at each other. Seeing me, the two of them stood up at the same time and said, "Isabella. Isabella." Then the two of them were stunned at the same time. After looking at each other with hostility, they both turned to look at me in unison. The expressions in their eyes actually both seemed a bit aggrieved. I frowned and walked over to look at James. James didn't know what he had imagined in his mind. Immediately, an injured expression appeared on his face. And Levi's expression somehow became a bit smug in an instant. I wrinkled my brows and said, "James, why do you let anyone into the house?" As soon as these words came out, James was surprised for a moment, but soon his eyes lit up. He forced down the corners of his mouth and pulled my sleeve, pitifully, to explain, "I didn't." He opened the door and came in by himself. Only then did I remember that Levi did always have the key to my house. I raised my eyes and took a look at Levi, but still accused James emotionlessly, "Next time when you encounter such a thing, just call the police. I don't like having strangers in my house." Levi's face instantly became extremely ugly. "Isabella." He gritted his teeth and called my name. Hearing this, James immediately took a big step and stood in front of me, afraid that he would hurt me. But I didn't dodge. I calmly stared at Levi and said, "Levi, you're not welcome here. Don't come again in the future." Levi looked at me and then at James. He clenched and unclenched his palms. "All right, Isabella, you're really something." Watching him leave angrily, I just sighed and told James, "Ask someone to change the lock tomorrow." James nodded obediently. Then he stared at me for a while before suddenly reaching out and hugging me as if he had made up his mind. "I swear that I, James, will never betray Isabella." I was stunned for a moment and didn't say anything. I just gently raised my hand and hugged him back. I have to say that young people really have good physical strength. As someone who had suffered from insomnia for years, I finally had a good sleep. When I woke up, it was already noon. Since it was Saturday, I ate the breakfast made by James at home and then sent him back to his studio. Then I habitually went to the flower shop to buy some flowers and went to the cemetery to visit my mother, but this time, I saw Levi in front of my mother's tomb. Since Olivia committed suicide, he hadn't come to visit my mother again. I was holding the flowers and looked at him across several rows of tombs. Then I walked over without caring and put the flowers I bought in front of my mother's tomb. "Isabella," he looked at me and hesitated for a long time before speaking. "Are you really going to form a marriage alliance with that kid from the Ava family?" I turned around and looked him up and down with my eyes, then asked sarcastically, "Does it have anything to do with you?" As I spoke, I picked up the flowers he had placed in front of my mother's tomb and threw them into the trash can beside it. "Isabella." Seeing my action, Levi came over anxiously and grabbed my hand. "What on earth do you want to do?" "You should ask yourself what you want to do." I shook off his hand and slapped him in the face. "You hit me?" He looked at me in disbelief. "This slap should have been given to you on the wedding day," I said without much emotion. "Don't you think that after you made such a big scene at the wedding and used all means to suppress my new project, we could still get along as if nothing had happened?" Levi's expression went blank for a moment, and I smiled and said to him in an extremely sarcastic tone, "Levi, I know what you're thinking, but you overestimate yourself too much." After saying that, I turned around and left, leaving Levi alone standing there in a daze. I knew that he had never thought of breaking up with me completely. He just wanted me to submit and make up for his guilt towards Olivia. Because he also knew me well and was aware that I basically lacked trust in the outside world. Except for him, who grew up with me since childhood, it was very difficult for me to give such feelings to another person again. However, he didn't understand that love had never been something indispensable to me, and I would never let others take advantage of my feelings to hurt me. The wedding between me and James was held in a very grand manner. Probably wanting to help me vent my anger, Ava spent a large amount of money to book all the advertising screens on the city's landmarks on that day to celebrate my new marriage with James. And James took charge himself and arranged a drone show before the wedding officially started. He even edited the opening video of our wedding by himself, saying that this time he must outshine his sister and make it to the hot search by virtue of his skills. Several employees in his studio were also very supportive, saying that what their boss had done this time was a masterpiece that combined all the skills he had accumulated over the years in editing game promotional videos. Ava sneered dismissively beside them, but then she promoted this video to the advertising position on the hot search, letting her brother deeply experience what was called the power of money. James took a look at the comments under the hot search and quickly came up to me, looking proud. "Look, netizens say that we're a perfect match." At this time, the media present asked our family to take pictures. Promising, Ava smiled and rolled her eyes at James, then also came over to hold my hand and sighed. "I really didn't expect that in the end it would be us who became a family." James also quickly stood up straight, grinning foolishly with a serious look on his face. It wasn't until Levi suddenly appeared. I then looked at the Ava siblings and asked, "Did you invite him?" James quickly shook his head, and Ava even more firmly denied it. "How could that be? Do you want me to ask someone to drive him out?" I looked at the media reporters around and didn't want my wedding to become a laughingstock again. Moreover, there were indeed some things that should be settled. So I asked my assistant to take Levi to the lounge at the backstage of the hotel. "All right, what do you want to do today?" I was sitting on the sofa in the lounge wearing my wedding dress. Levi looked at my wedding dress and seemed a bit distracted. It wasn't until he saw James beside me that he said with a dissatisfied look on his face, "I have something to say to you alone." Hearing this, James looked at me. Finally, out of respect, he still slightly got up and was about to leave, but I grabbed him. "There's no need for that. I don't plan to hide things between you and me from him." Hearing my words, James' eyes were like those of a big dog that had just received a reward. He also proudly raised his chin at Levi. And before I could react, he took out a little red book from the inner pocket of his suit, opened it, and placed it in front of Levi. What kind of person would carry their marriage certificate with them all the time? But seeing the proud little expression on his face, besides finding it funny, I also thought it was somehow rather cute. So I could only follow his intention and said to Levi, "As you can see, James and I are now a legal couple, so if you want to say something, just say it. If not, please feel free to leave." "How could it be?" Levi murmured as he looked at the photo of me and James on the marriage certificate. "How could you really marry someone else?" "Nope." James slowly put away the marriage certificate, completely ignoring Levi's increasingly ugly face. "Strictly speaking, it's me who married Isabella." "Isabella?" Levi suddenly raised his eyes to look at me. "You did it on purpose, right? You just wanted to make me angry. You clearly knew that I had never really wanted to break up with you." "Levi," I interrupted him. "I've said it before. You overestimated yourself. Why do you think I would still be with you after you did those things?" But you promised me when we were 17 that you would only marry me in the future," he said unwillingly. "You also said that you would never let me down," I said in a flat tone. "But in the end, didn't you still betray the vow between us and fall in love with Olivia?" "No, I didn't. I was just. You were just unable to let go of your guilt towards Olivia and were dissatisfied with my strength, so you wanted to use Olivia as an excuse to put pressure on me." I stated his thoughts very straightforwardly. "Levi, I know you very well. It's true that your heart wavered because of Olivia, and it's also true that you wanted to take the opportunity to suppress me. Isabella, I don't deny it," I smiled. "Actually, during the time when I was recuperating abroad, I figured it out. You've always been steady in handling things. How could you have created such a big farce at the wedding just for Olivia?" Before Olivia died, you were already very dissatisfied with me, right? You were dissatisfied that I didn't listen to you and launched a project to compete with the Levi Group at that time. You were dissatisfied that I wasn't willing to transfer the 5% of the Levi Group's shares in my hand to you. And you were even more dissatisfied that I proposed that at least one of our future children should take my surname and inherit the Isabella Group. So at that time, you acquiesced in Olivia staying by your side. Did you also want to support Olivia to inherit my father's assets, let her compete with me, suppress me, make me feel a sense of crisis, and force me to rely on you more and compromise with you? I didn't. Levi still wanted to deny it. But I didn't give him the chance to quibble. I asked my assistant to bring the evidence collected by the private detective some time ago and placed it in front of him. During the time when I was recuperating in Tuscany, I wasn't just immersed in the sadness of losing my relationship and doing nothing. I knew very well that Levi wasn't the kind of person who would act impulsively on emotions. So I spent a high price to ask the best team to reinvestigate the connection between Levi and Olivia. Only then did I find out that after my father was imprisoned and I began to take charge of the Isabella Group, Levi had already started to contact Olivia. After all, although my father was a scumbag, he had controlled the Isabella family for many years and had shares and assets in his hands. And Olivia, as his legal heir, obeyed Levi's every word. Levi wanted to plant her in the Isabella Group so that he could use her to check and balance me when necessary. Perhaps even he himself didn't expect that Olivia really loved him, but also really had a terminal illness. So whether it was out of guilt towards Olivia or for the convenience of suppressing me in the future, he had to get Olivia's mother, Chloe, another legal heir of my father, out of the sanatorium. But he didn't expect that I would be so ruthless and directly got rid of Chloe with the help of the Isabella family. And that so-called substitute for Olivia beside you, Grace, is just another illegitimate daughter born by my father outside. I took out a stack of photos of him visiting my father in prison with a sneer again. You asked someone to do a paternity test for Grace and my father, persuaded my father to transfer his shares to Grace, and deliberately made such a big scene at the wedding. All you wanted was to push Grace out. In your original plan, I was supposed to swallow my pride for the new project of the Isabella Group, losing my dignity in front of the partners and shareholders while also undermining my authority as the leader of the group. And when you showed up publicly with Grace, you wanted everyone to know that it was the Levi Group behind Grace. You had originally planned to take out the share transfer agreement of my father after our wedding and let Grace enter the board of directors of the Isabella Group rightfully. I paused for a moment, looked at Levi's increasingly pale face, and asked him sarcastically, "So why didn't you do that in the end?" Levi was stunned for a moment and then he quickly understood. It was you. You hid Grace away. I didn't deny it. Although Grace was also my father's illegitimate daughter, she was just an accidental product of my father's casual affairs. My father didn't treat their mother and daughter well. And Grace didn't have much affection for my father, her biological father. If it hadn't been for making money to treat her mother's illness, she wouldn't have agreed to Levi's request. But she knew her own limitations very well and was aware that she couldn't handle this kind of life full of intrigues at all. All she wanted was to live a quiet and peaceful life with her mother. So when I offered to arrange the best medical team for her mother, provide the best special drugs, and ensure the money and safety for her and her mother to live abroad for the rest of their lives, she didn't hesitate to transfer the shares she had just obtained to me. I took out 2 copies of the already effective share transfer agreements from the documents and placed them in front of Levi. When Levi saw the first share transfer agreement of the Isabella Group signed by Grace, although his complexion wasn't good, he was still relatively calm. But when he saw the second transfer agreement, he couldn't hold his expression any longer. "Isabella, you transferred your shares to Oscar?" When Levi saw the first share transfer agreement of the Isabella Group signed by Grace, although his complexion wasn't good, he was still relatively calm. Back then, in order to help Levi gain a firm foothold in the Levi Group, I pledged part of the shares of the Isabella Group in my hands and the Rose Manor left by my grandmother to obtain these 5% of the shares of the Levi Group. Over the years, at the shareholders' meetings of the Levi Group, I had unconditionally supported Levi. Even during the time when we were quarreling and having a Cold War, I had never made things difficult for him at the shareholders' meetings of the Levi Group. Almost everyone took it for granted that the voting rights of the 5% of the shares in my hands belonged to Levi. This was also the reason why Levi had been able to firmly suppress Oscar over the years. Oscar was the son of Levi's second uncle, his cousin. He and Levi's uncle, who was in prison, jointly held 24% of the shares of the Levi Group, while Levi held 27% of the shares. But if my 5% were added to Oscar's, the shares in Oscar's hands would exceed Levi's. Perhaps this was also the reason why Levi had been trying every means to get me to transfer the shares to him all along, because he had never really trusted me. Isabella, how could you? How dare you? He held the copies of the transfer agreements, his eyes red as if they could bleed. With our feelings over so many years, how could you do this to me? Seeing Levi suddenly become emotional, James subconsciously stood up and blocked in front of me. Unexpectedly, this move of his further irritated Levi. Levi suddenly rushed over, pushed James aside, raised his hand and was about to hit me. But his action froze when he saw the scar on the back of my hand. Instead, I slapped him first. Isabella. He stared at the back of my hand, with tears in his eyes. I followed his gaze and looked at the scar on the back of my hand, then sneered, Levi, it's not that I never bowed my head for you. It was you who betrayed me first. Back then, the Levi family was controlled by Levi's uncle, and Levi was in danger several times and narrowly escaped death. I didn't hesitate to kneel down to our opponents and had 2 metacarpal bones in my palm broken by them just to ensure his safety and make them agree to step forward to guarantee Levi's safety. Isabella. Levi suddenly slumped down. I'm wrong. We shouldn't have ended up like this. I've never loved Olivia. It's always been you that I love. I just couldn't let go of her death. I just wanted you to be more obedient. But I never thought of breaking up with you. Isabella. I know I'm wrong. I won't do this again. Can we go back to the way we were? No, Levi. When you chose to cooperate with my father to suppress me, you should have expected that we would definitely come to this day. I said, besides, to be honest, you're really not worthy of being Isabella's husband. After saying that, I took James by the hand and walked out of the lounge. A year and a half later, when I was expanding my business abroad, Ava called me on video and talked about the Levi Group. Since Oscar got my 5% of the shares and had some bargaining chips in his hands, he started a new round of open and covert struggles with Levi. To be honest, Oscar is really his father's son. Seeing that Levi had won over the shareholders again and acquired enough scattered shares, he became desperate and had Levi kidnapped, trying to force him to transfer his shares. Ava said, it's a pity. This time, without you to safeguard him, when he was rescued, it was said that one of his legs was completely disabled. I casually said, oh. Obviously, Ava on the other side of the video didn't expect my reaction to be so calm, so she sighed and said, actually, I've never really understood Levi. If he had been with you properly back then, none of these things would have happened. I smiled and said, perhaps he has never trusted anyone. Moreover, if I hadn't persuaded Grace first back then, even if I had fallen out with Levi, the worst result for him would have been that he exchanged the shares of the Isabella Group in Grace's hands for the 5% of the Levi Group's shares in my hands. In the end, he could still achieve the goal of taking away the shares in my hands. Ava thought about it and realized that was indeed the case. She was even a bit scared for me. It's a good thing that you didn't end up with him. This guy even calculated those who had gone through life and death with him to such an extent. He's really terrifying. Thinking about it this way, it's not bad to find someone who's a hopeless romantic. At this time, James, wearing an apron and holding our daughter Isabella, suddenly appeared at the door of the room and called me with a sunny face, "Dear wife, it's time to eat." Ava rolled her eyes when she saw this. Forget it. Compared to this cheesy look, I still prefer the cold and aloof type a bit more. Ava asked again, actually, back then, with the money from selling the shares of the Levi Group in your hands, you didn't need to form a marriage alliance to get investment. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I still don't understand why you agreed to form a marriage alliance with my brother. I smiled and didn't answer. I was also too lazy to think about what was on my mind at the moment when I agreed to Ava. Whether it was the heartbeat brought by a moment of loneliness or the instinctive weighing of pros and cons, what mattered was that now I knew what I wanted and had the ability to control my own life. I could accept and respond to such a relationship and be responsible for my own choices. I smiled and said goodbye to Ava, deleted the unread messages sent by Levi again, and then turned around and asked James with a smile, "What delicious food did you make for lunch today?"